All right, let's look at some of the most common ways that these partisan news organizations and fact checkers try to rewrite history, particularly when it comes to Donald Trump. The first one, I'm not going to spend much time on it, selection bias. It's not just about, for example, selectively fact-checking who they want to destroy or who they want to protect, but also selectively picking who is their sort of minister of truth that they might, for example, take a quote from in order to proclaim that something is definitively true or false. Fact-checking shorthand speech. What do I mean by that? If I were to say motorcycles are always driven too fast, I don't mean all people who ride motorcycles ride them too fast. I instead mean there seems to be a tendency that they're all too often ridden faster than the speed limit, they're weaving in and out of lanes, they're revving up their engines, that kind of thing. But so I see this all the time. Donald Trump will speak in shorthand, generalize, and then the fact checkers will swoop in, take his words literally, and declare what Trump said was a lie. And then this narrative about Trump's lies gets spun into headlines and set in stone talking points. So here's an example. Trump said that the only jobs created under Biden were jobs for illegals and COVID bounce back jobs. So 5.6 million jobs created for illegals, while 7.4 million jobs were created for native-born Americans. But when you consider that illegals only make up about 3% of the population, if jobs were created evenly across the board for citizens and illegals, you would expect only like 0.2 or 0.3 million jobs created for illegals, not 5.6 million. You see how Trump's shorthand talk is actually true. Here's something else. There's more than one way to look at statistics. You could look at strictly job growth from when Biden took office, or you could look at the job growth trend line pace. And when you do that, you're even more justified in generalizing by saying the only jobs, because there's about a 2% jobs shortfall. We haven't reached the trend line. Another example of fact-checking shorthand, pause the video if you like. And here's one more where at the end of the fact check, they admit the truth that Trump's sanctions on Iran made life difficult for terror groups, and they admit that they don't know how much terror operations were disrupted. So it's not definitively false. Yet they declared just that. And if there weren't any terror attacks under Trump, then why can't Trump make that argument and take credit? Also, isn't it a shell game? You stop funding Iran, then they have to use money from their general budget to fund terror groups, which makes life harder at home. Another sneaky thing that fact checkers do, they'll try to deny something that indeed happened by making a straw man denial. Conversely, they can knock down a straw man in order to, for example, make something that's false or unproven appear to be true. A good example is the fact that Kamala Harris voiced support for and encouraged people to donate to this reprehensible Minnesota Freedom Fund, and how news outlets tried to rewrite history and gaslight the whole thing, even turning the tables on Trump. So their angle of deception was to add a qualifier. She never donated. You can see how the average uninformed reader would be fooled by this tweet. And here's factcheck.org turning the tables on Trump. The article basically tries to portray the Freedom Fund as having good intentions, and they defend Kamala by saying she does not have the power to free criminals. So what? Here's Newsweek adding the qualifier for murderers and rapists, then arguing that these are not the people Kamala advocated for. Well, did she not do her research into this fund? Of course she did. And why is she wanting to bail out these violent protesters? That's bad enough on its own. But you can see how this headline fools people. This headline might fool people too. A lot of people just read headlines and maybe the first paragraph, and then they get bored. Another thing with these fact checkers is that very often all they're doing is being merely argumentative. They don't have something that's definitively false. The Washington Post calling Kamala's tweet misleading, misunderstood. You see, the Minnesota Freedom Fund has good intentions. They're angels. But again, all it takes is a misleading headline to fool people. Here's another one where they're subjectively interpreting ambiguous words in order to gaslight people into thinking something never happened. I'm not sure, but Trump may have just misspoke when he added the word in, or maybe he meant ushered into the chamber from the hallways as opposed to ushered from outside the Capitol. But as far as being ushered around inside, there is absolutely video evidence to make the argument that people were ushered. Jacob Chansley, the so-called QAnon shaman, was escorted by multiple police. There's video of people casually walking through the stanchions as police just stood by and observed like ushers. And so the Associated Press hastily cherry-picked the U.S. Capitol Police Chief's one person's selective statement as absolute proof that nobody was ushered. In a statement, he denies that his officers helped the rioters and acted as tour guides. Those are a lot of ambiguous words there. First of all, define help. This word could be widely interpreted. Secondly, help the so-called rioters. Well, what about the peaceful people who just wandered in? Were they ushered? And how do you define tour guide? This is another subjective word. I think it's very possible this police chief is just another never-Trumper who is skilled at using ambiguous language. And finally, sleight of hand. First, the facts. On January 6th, no police officers were killed. One Capitol police officer suffered 2 strokes and died of natural causes the following day. Also, a protester, Ashley Babbitt, was shot and killed by a police officer. But the media and Democrats have tried very creatively to get people to believe that protesters killed police. Here's Axios being technically correct. It was deadly, but it was Ashley Babbitt who was killed. And they have the gall to attack Trump. Just amazing. The media, they are skilled liars.